Hello and welcome back to another episode of the For the Property Investor podcast. And we're here with the weekly news, of course, as we are every week. And of course, the only man that brings us the news, Mr. Nick Bendel. Hello, Nick.
Hello, Owen. Great to join you today.
Thank you. Thank you. And what's been happening in your week for the past week?
Well, my week did indeed go a week, as you hinted at, and it was not a week, it was a strong week. I enjoyed it. My business, Hunter and Scribe, we're a copywriting agency. We write content for finance and property businesses throughout Australia. And during the week, we landed a new client, a financial advice business that wants help with an award submission. We were looking forward to helping the client with that.
Oh yes, you win so many awards for your clients. It's amazing. It's brilliant, and I think you should get an award for it.
An award for award writing.
Yes, yes. Uh, well, actually, tell me, is there an industry award for award writing?
Not that I know of. And if there was, would the entrants have to write award submissions to enter that award? And would they write them themselves or outsource it to someone else? That would be the ultimate irony.
Yes, that would be an interesting one. But um, well, good to see you've landed a new client and writing more award submissions. Here at Leafield, being a property management business across 5 states, we've been busy. We've had some new staff recently start with us, so getting them all trained up and getting used to our systems. And we've got a bit of leasing happening at the moment, about normal levels, calmed down from earlier in the year. And we've got a number of new clients coming on as well at the moment. So that's always a fun time, onboarding new business. So yes, it's been an interesting process. But Nick, you've brought us the news. 3 stories as usual, I hope. What's the first one?
The first one is government incentive proving to be double-edged sword for first home buyers. The federal government's decision to expand the 5% deposit scheme last October has intensified competition at the entry-level end of the market, according to Cotality. Since October, properties that are priced below the 5% deposit scheme price caps have grown 6.7%, while those priced above have grown only 3.6%. That's a national overview. Properties below the price cap have also grown faster in every single capital city. Cotality has suggested there are likely to be 3 explanations for the fact that these lower priced homes have been growing more quickly. First, buyers who are planning to use the scheme have brought forward their purchases in order to beat future price rises. Second, serviceability constraints are pushing demand toward more affordable properties. And third, investor activity in the lower end of the market has increased. Owen, are you surprised that this expansion of the 5% deposit scheme has boosted demand at the entry-level end of the market?
Not at all, Nick. This is what we were all banging on about at the time, that if you provide more incentives for to make it easier for people to be able to buy, then you're going to boost demand. Yeah, it's kind of basic, common sense, isn't it? So yes, so now we've got a price difference of about 3%. That has increased. So under those price caps, where the 5% deposit scheme is applicable. So does that mean the government now has to take it from a 5% deposit scheme to a 8% deposit scheme for all of the current first home buyers who weren't able to get in before the scheme started? I mean, yeah, it's ridiculous. Everyone and their dog was predicting this would happen, and it has. So it's crazy.
Well, on that note, Cotality is found that the pool of eligible suburbs is shrinking due to these price rises at the entry-level end of the market. Now there are only 11.6% of suburbs that are below the price cap. So should the government lift the price caps in response?
Well, that's their only choice. So yeah, it's so the government will be guaranteeing a much higher loan amount now, but yeah, that means that the borrowers, the purchasers, need to borrow a lot more, and yeah, does that mean that their incomes have to be greater? So it's going to be a point where they've reached their caps of how much they can borrow. So yeah, it doesn't quite work.
We've had discussions previously about whether governments should be in the housing incentive game, but let's say for argument's sake they are going to give incentives. Would the government get more bang for its buck if it took the subsidies it was giving to first home buyers and redirected them to property developers instead?
Yes, we need more supply in the market, and if there were more schemes to be able to help developers turn soil and get the approved plans through councils, through state governments, so that we can start building more. The problem is, especially if it's a large building of apartments and units, yeah, they can take 3 years to build. Yeah, they should have been doing this 3 years ago. Instead of being distracted by all these other things like referendums and spending money and employing employing more government employees. It's get out there and fix the problems that we wanted the government to do by voting for them. So yeah, it's ridiculous.
Interesting idea, supporting property developers over first home buyers. I'm looking at it from a political perspective. Giving money to first home buyers is politically popular. I'm guessing that giving subsidies to greedy, rich property developers probably would not be, especially if the first home buyer subsidies were cut at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it's too late to be dealing with politics at the moment. I don't care who does it, but someone has to take responsibility for actually fixing the problem rather than just kicking it down the road, borrowing more money. We're about to hit $1 trillion in debt. You know, we've just gone past our 20-year anniversary when Mr. Costello, our treasurer at the time, 20 years ago, Peter Costello, stood up and said, we now have effectively net, zero debt, and as a federal government. So, but since then, it was about 12 months later that they lost to Mr. Kevin 07. And guess what started happening that year? Borrowing. It started again. Now, every successive government on both sides of the fence made the problem worse. They just kept on borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. Now, we're almost going to hit $1 trillion in debt as a federal government. And that's disgusting. We've got the best trade terms that we've almost ever have in times. We've got almost full employment. We're earning more tax as a federal government than we ever have. There's no reason why we shouldn't be making surpluses every single year. Then we'd have plenty of money to invest as a government into social housing or funding developments, getting all these problems actually fixed because we'd have the money. So yeah, it's ridiculous, Nick.
Well, I share your frustration. I believe our federal budget deficit is currently at 1.1%. So for every $100 in taxes we're collecting, we're spending $101.30. Well, sorry, $101.10.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to our next story. We're going to look at supply from a different angle, Property analysts forecast steep rise in Sydney rents. Renters in Sydney's middle and outer rings could face steep rent increases if capital gains tax discounts were reduced and the number of investors in the market fell, according to Founded analysis quoted by news.com.au. Founded head of research Kent Lardner said the government would be laying the foundations for a crisis if it eliminated the CGT discount without reducing migration, with lower priced properties likely to experience the greatest impact. Kent Lardner said, for many investors, buying a new rental is really about the long-term capital growth. Once you take that incentive away, most investors would cease buying properties in areas where rental yields were already marginal. There are a lot of these areas. It will be a nightmare for tenants. As the tenant pool grows and the supply of rentals stalls, competition will rise. Rents could rise. It may well become easier for some renters to become first home buyers because of less investor competition, but not every renter has the means to buy. Some people need to rent. The problem is there will be fewer new rentals coming to market. So Owen, your business Leafield, you operate in 5 states. I know you are quite prominent in the Sydney market as well. Is Kent Lardner right to speculate that if the government eliminates the CGT discount when it releases the budget on May 12, that investors will respond by pulling out of low yield suburbs?
Yeah, quite possibly. It's and a lot of those low yield suburbs are in inner city locations, especially in Sydney. Sydney's got one of the lowest yields in the country, and across the metro area. So you're looking at anywhere between 2 and maybe 3.5, 4% max in Sydney. It would probably average in the 2.5, 3% mark. Now, you'd have to have a huge deposit to be able to put into a property like that to be able for it to at least cover its own costs. And yeah, so it's ridiculous to think that and a lot of Sydney-siders rely on rental properties to be able to live close to where they need to work. Otherwise, it's going to have a huge effect on the rental market, and people won't be able to afford properties because there'll be less properties for them to lease. Now, we saw this in 86, 87, or 85 to 87. Yeah, when the Hawke-Keating government took away negative gearing benefits altogether, and we saw an exodus of investors, and we saw rents skyrocketing. And so Paul Keating, a couple of years later, came back with this great idea. It's called negative gearing, and guess what? It worked. So since then, it was John Howard and Malcolm Turnbull who both wound back a lot of the negative gearing benefits that Paul Keating brought in. Now, the Greens don't bring that up, do they? No, the Greens don't bring up the fact that it was some of our most conservative prime ministers that we've had in the last 30 years that have actually wound back a lot of the negative gearing benefits for residential property investment due to negative gearing. So it's crazy.
So you're suggesting that if the government does get rid of the CGT discount on May 12 during the budget, that might lead to investors pulling out of low yield suburbs. What will they do with their money then? Will they invest in higher yield suburbs? Will they invest in non-property assets instead? What do you think?
I think a property investor is always a property investor. And yes, it's more likely, and we're seeing this trend. We've been seeing this trend for quite a number of years with the rise of the buyer's agent, who and they've been out there looking for high yield as well as high growth properties, and so that you can own these properties maybe once they've gone through their growth cycle, if you wanted to be able to keep them long term, but also to be able to have good prospects to be able to sell them to another investor, they need to be a good high yield. Yes, the dual income properties or the 3 or 4 units in one block, they've been popular for a number of years. And the popularity for them to be built has been growing over the years, and also councils and state governments like them because you're putting more supply into the market for renters as well. So yeah, those properties are bound to become more popular because of the higher yield, and so that they can pay for themselves and to be able to make it worthwhile so that you're not taking such a risk of losing money on a monthly basis from a cash flow point of view, just for the benefit of future capital gain in Sydney. And because of those high price points in Sydney, yes, the capital gain is pretty nice, but yeah, you pay for it out of your pocket every month with those interest payments.
So just going back to the point Kent Larner was making, if the government does get rid of the CGT discount, he's suggesting that investors are going to leave the market, so supply will fall. But the problem will really happen if migration stays at the level it is, because demand will then be quite elevated. What if the government was to eliminate the CGT discount and slash migration? Would those two things cancel each other out?
Not sure if they would cancel each other out, but they would probably view it as issues that aren't connected, and which obviously they are in definitely one way. There are ways that there are certainly reasons why they're not connected, because we need migration for skilled migration for migrants, for the economy to be able to grow with jobs and industry and so on. But in terms of the housing issue, yes, we've got a huge issue where we've already got high demand for rental properties as well as properties to buy, and slashing migration would actually help that. But yeah, whether the greater economy can deal with that, that's another issue. But I highly doubt the government would put those two and two together and actually do something about it for that reason.
And our final story is looking at supply and affordability from another angle again, how Australia compares to the rest of the world. Ray White Group economist Atom Gotian has analysed home ownership rates in other countries and identified possible options for Australia to consider. Western European countries like Germany, Holland, and Switzerland have lower home ownership rates than Australia. However, those countries have, quote, built their housing systems around renting as a legitimate, stable, long-term life choice, not a way station to ownership. Therefore, lower home ownership rates don't reflect a policy failure, he says. Rather, they are, quote, the result of strong tenant protection laws, professionally managed rental stock, historically rent-controlled urban housing, and a deliberate post-war policy decision not to subsidise owner occupation. He then moves on to Japan, which also has a lower home ownership rate than Australia, and which takes an even more radical approach than Western Europe. Quote, residential buildings depreciate to near zero within 30 years, stripping housing of its wealth storage function entirely. Because houses depreciate rather than appreciate, Japan builds continuously. In Tokyo, more housing permits are issued annually than in the entire state of California, yet rents have stayed flat for decades. Without capital gain expectations, there is no political constituency for restricting supply, end quote. So, Owen, in some Western European countries, as we've heard, renters have more rights in Australia and more security of tenure, which means there isn't the same yearning for home ownership. Does that model sound better than ours?
I think elements of it could be adapted, and that's where the build to rent model is looking at coming into Australia. Hasn't got a lot of traction as yet. Some of these developments are still getting out of the ground and it'll take a number of years. I think it's possible in areas where you're looking at inner city high density housing in apartment blocks where a lot of those costs can be centralized and it's yeah, I don't see any issue around that. The problem is in urban areas, in the suburbs, not everyone wants to, people want to live in houses, especially if they have families, and that's where they want to live. So to be able to do that with individual investors, where they are, buying it for those specific reasons, for themselves, it's like the Aussie investor has it's never always been a a decision that they're buying for investment for the rest of their lives. They might see it as something, oh, we lived in that for the first few years as our first home. So we don't want to let go of it. So we might rent it out for a while. And see how we go. So it becomes the accidental investment. So they're not buying it just for investment purposes. Or they buy it as something that they want to give to their kids, or something that they buy up the coast so that they can move into it later when they retire. Now, I wouldn't say any of those reasons are good reasons to buy an investment property, but that's how a lot of Australians think when they're buying property for themselves. And so maybe the attitude needs to change when people are specifically thinking of an investment property. And if we can build into that, yes, longer tenure for the tenants to be able to take advantage of that. As long as the investor is going into it with the knowledge that they're buying for a long term and it's only ever going to be an investment property, then that can work. And that's where the build to rent model can certainly provide that. But do we want to hand over all of this growth and income to big businesses that are coming in to control these build to rent projects, and everything's starting to become more centralized as a result, and none of that wealth and income benefit is getting passed on to the individual. And yes, that's un-Australian.
What do you think of the situation in Japan where, as we just learned, properties don't experience capital growth and therefore there's no incentive to restrict supply? Would that kind of model work here?
Well, that's maybe a bigger conversation because there's reasons why the property market in Japan hasn't had capital growth for a very, very long time, and it's due to underlying economic issues in their economy. Their economy has been stagnant for a very long time, which is why the yen's value has dropped a lot, which is why it's one of the favourite holiday spots for Australians now. I think it's even taking over Bali, and as the hot spot to go to for holidays for the average Aussie. So it's to be able to answer that, you've got to talk about the bigger issues in the Japanese economy. They've had to adapt and change. It's the way this federal government is pushing us. We might have to adapt and change at some point as well, because especially with these federal budgets and our budget deficit, it's the amount of debt that we're carrying as a country now it's it's quite sad to see that in a number of years we might have similar issues to what Japan has.
Mm. Across the three stories today, we've had a look at a few different reform ideas. What is one housing policy change you think we should be considering in Australia that we haven't talked about so far?
I think the way we tax housing is a big problem, and I think all three levels of government, but especially federal and state, need to be able to get together and rethink it, because they could have a lot of influence in the way that Australians buy and hold on to property, both as owner-occupiers and investors, which would help to release up supply and also have the property market become more liquid. So it's easier for people to buy and sell and move. And I'm not talking about investors here trying to speculate. I'm talking about the biggest majority of the property market who are owner-occupiers, who've lived there for a long time, or they're on their second or third house after they've moved a few times. That's where the majority of the market is. It's not investors. It's not first-time buyers. It's in those mum and dads who have owned those properties for a very long time. They've lived in them. They've probably sold once or twice to get into this house that they've then stayed in for a long time. They might be retired, but there's no incentive for them to downsize right now. So, but to be able to do that, not one level of government has the ability to be able to make the changes necessary by themselves to make it worthwhile for them, because you've got an individual household who is dealing with the whole picture of federal and state government taxes, but their situation and their problem with trying to make a decision can't be solved by one level of government. And so, yes, that's my answer to that question about all three levels, especially state and federal, need to get together to be able to see how they can influence more liquidity in the Australian housing market.
Just before we go, we've talked about the federal budget coming up on May the 12th. We have an RBA cash rate decision on May the 5th. Quick prediction, what do you think the RBA will do?
I think they made these last two rate rise decisions so that they could hold on May the 5th, so that they weren't influencing one way or another the federal budget. So, with only a few days out. So I'm predicting a hold.
Okay, I'm predicting a rate rise. We will find out soon enough. Owen, thank you as always for the great chat.
Thank you very much. And we'll see you next week, Nick, with the weekly news. See you then.